very often when the press writes about a woman candidate, they write about what she's wearing, what she's like. They focus on the style and not the substance, which really doesn't happen with men. And so women are often judged by what we wear, how we speak, what our voice sounds like. And so they focus on our sort of style over substance. And studies have shown that when the press does that, your likability basically drops. Even if the press doesn't mention like the color of the suit, for example, just the fact that they mention that you're wearing this, just any mention is negative. Like anything neutral, even positive, negative, neutral, any evaluation of the women style basically like your likability just plummets. And so when you announce for public office, you're starting at kind of like a deficit. You have to prove that you're running not because you're ambitious, but because you have a purpose. Whereas men, they don't have to do that. You have to prove that you're qualified to run. Men, they don't have to, because they'll automatically assume they're qualified. And you have to be likable, because the voters will vote for men who are not likable, but they will not vote for women who are unlikable.
Hi, Mary. Welcome to the Awakened Heart podcast.
Hello, Nancy. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm thrilled for you to be here. And you look lovely in that beautiful blue sweater sitting in front of me here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I am really looking forward to our conversation. And as I had mentioned before we hit record, I really haven't had anyone on that is in the space that you are in politics. And you just came out with this book, Women in Politics, that I was lucky enough to get a copy of, which I'm delving into, that was just released at the end of October. So it's out there and available now. But you have such a really cool background. Like there's so many accolades that you have as far as, you entered in politics, and then you were trying to, you entered in the healthcare space where you were advocating for, healthcare for women and the people that are more disadvantaged. And you had an earlier book that was called Far From Home, Shattering the Myth of the Model Minority. So you advocate a lot for minority, people of color, women in the spaces of like healthcare and politics. So we see a lot in politics, and it's generally a male-dominated sphere. And you're helping to break that glass ceiling with women and using your voice to advocate for women in this kind of space. So can you share the journey that led you into politics and what inspired you to pursue a career in this field?
Oh, thank you, Nancy. I could probably talk like nonstop for like an hour just to answer like your first question. But what I love about this new book and just, the work that I've been doing is the opportunity to talk more about women's empowerment and how we can support more women to not only go into politics, but into leadership. And that's what the book is about. And one of my goals in writing this book, is obviously to inspire other women to write their own life path, because I came here when I was 12, didn't speak any English. My parents decided to move us to Orange County, and their expectation of me was to be a good girl and, go to college, maybe just long enough to meet somebody wealthy, then I'll marry that person, and then I'll have kids, and then he could take care of me. I mean, that was really their expectation of me. And just for some reason, I just wasn't really sold on that good girl training and just the sort of the life path that they expected of me. And one day well, anyway, I decided to go to college, and I was enrolled at Cal State Long Beach. And one day I decided to enroll in this class. It was women's studies course. And, at that time in my mind, I thought, oh, this has to do with how I could be a better woman, like home economics, or how to become like a better good girl. I had no idea it was about feminism. And I took that class and I started reading women's literature and feminist literature. And that's when, everything just changed. And I'm not a professional writer, but I keep writing and wanting to publish something. And I think that really has to do with the fact that, when I was 19, 20 years old at Cal State Long Beach taking this class, the way that changed my life and the women's literature, and learning more about what the feminists have done for women in this country, learning more about that work really inspired me and helped me become who I am today. And so that's why I keep wanting to write, I think, is to show other women that you don't have to be controlled by your background, your family histories, your language barrier, whatever you think is a barrier in your mind. You don't have to live that path. And so I am so grateful for the opportunity to be able to publish a book like this that not only documents my journey, but I had the opportunity to interview 17 women and one man for this book, and also illustrate their journeys, their political journeys, personal journeys, and how and why they decided to choose politics and leadership. So that's what the book is about. And one of the things that I love to just kind of open up and talk about, right out of the gate about women in politics, is that the year that we came to this country, my older sister passed. That was the same year that she died by suicide. And we came to this country like literally 6 months after she passed. And the way my family dealt with her death was really tragic. We had to pretend she never existed. Our parents destroyed all of her personal belongings.
Oh my
She was
God.
literally cut out of our photographs. And so I have all these skinny photos when we were kids that just makes no sense. She was just, like they just pretended she never existed. And there's so much shame and stigma surrounding mental health. So when I, after reading about Gloria Steinem and, Susan Faluti's book was one of my favorites. I mean, after reading about, feminist literature, I thought I can do anything, I can do something with my life, and I'm going to go to college and I'm going to become more educated and get some skills. And, as soon as I got sort of myself situated in the Bay Area, I was like, I need to start a national organization that addresses Asian Americans and mental health, because my sister suffered in silence, but that's very common. And that's what I've learned. We weren't allowed to really discuss her death. But when I read about the mental health issues in America, there's just really no difference just in terms of the need for awareness and access. So so I decided, I'm going to dedicate myself to mental health and Asian American women's health issues, because nobody was really talking about that at that time. And that experience and that advocacy work lasted 10 plus years. I worked on a statewide mental health ballot measure that passed, created billions of dollars in funding. I was appointed to a statewide mental health commission. And then I ran for the state assembly right after that. And I had a mentor who was a man. I interviewed him for the book, who really helped me get there and get into politics. And so that's been my journey, and in summary. And I feel very fortunate that I've had the opportunity to do these things, not just for my own, I did it for my sister because I really wanted to know what happened to her. But I had an opportunity to help so many others and advocate for mental health and other healthcare issues that are just so not talked about and underrepresented. So it's been a great, it's just been wonderful. And then the book, of course, goes into other women's stories to sort of point out that it's not just me who had to overcome these things, but there's so many other women in very powerful positions who are also, who are struggling and who have struggled through their personal journeys, but have overcome tremendous challenges to securing a leadership position, and then what they have done. So that's the book. That's about me. So I think I've answered all your questions.
No, you did such
I'll
a great.
stop there and let you jump in.
Literally, I'm crossing out all these. You just covered so many things that I was going to bring up, but I'm like, cross that off, cross that off. We got that. So I do want to go before we get into some of these other discussions. I do want to talk about the health field. Like, so you did so many things in the health field, and I had noted that you did something for concussions in women's sports, how it affects men and women differently. So we're seeing a lot now. We're seeing a lot of men going into women's sports. And this is a clear example about how, having a biological man in a woman's sports can be so detrimental to a woman. Like there was somebody that just got her teeth knocked out on a hockey field. So, and there's a lot of, to even say women right now, they're trying to take that language out of a lot of government stuff, a lot of stuff. I feel like women are under attack right now, where you can't even say woman, or, you're reduced to a birthing person or chest feeder. So how do you advocate, or are you advocating for women to really still hold their true place, without being reduced to losing, our spaces, or being reduced to being, a chest feeder or a cisgender or whatever that is, while still being able to, it's almost like regressing to what it was before all these strides we've already made in societies with all these women's movements. Feels like it's going backwards because we're losing a lot of the gain that we've had throughout these years to have our rightful place as women in society.
Yeah, I think you're raising something that is very important to point out, especially in social media. There's just been a lot of women running for office, and there's just been a lot of powerful movements lately. The Me Too, I think, was an incredible sort of perfect storm. Although this issue has been around forever, I think it caught a lot of attention, brought down very powerful men. So there's just a lot of people out there who are threatened by the women's empowerment movement that's happening for a while. But when you were talking, I just wanted to share a really quick story of something that happened last week. So I have a really good friend who is in Congress now. He's just an amazing leader, Congressman Ted Lieu out of Los Angeles area. And he has 1.6 million followers on Twitter. He really has mastered the way he, communicates with people on social media platforms. And so, so I asked him if he would share my book on his Twitter, because it would reach so many people. And so he did. And, he had a chance to read it and he loved it. And so he posted this beautiful thing on Twitter, and somebody asked him the same question as what you're asking. It's like somebody asked, well, what is women? And why is this so special, sort of thing. And what is the definition of women? And so I love Ted's response. He basically cited the American Dictionary and said, read this. Here's the definition of women, and so when you were talking, it really made me realize that there's a little bit of discomfort, I have to say, when I when I'm publishing or when I'm putting a book out there like this about that talks about women's empowerment and gender equality and political parity, I do worry that, you know, I will be attacked because on, you know, on social media, the fact, and I've cited this in the chapter, it's just a fact. The research shows that women just get more harassed online. You know, we get more attacked. Facebook study proved that more Democratic women than Democratic men get attacked. And so I think, you know, so I do worry about that. And I think it's a very valid question. In terms of, you know, looking at concussion, I authored the legislation when I was in the legislature that basically requires in the state of California one of the toughest return to play laws in the country, which basically says even if in a practice of a game, not just official game, even in a practice, if you sustain a concussion, you can't come back unless a doctor has cleared you. And that was my legislation, and that impacts everyone, not just women. But when I was working on that legislation, when I sponsored that legislation, I did a lot of research into the sort of the concussion and the link to brain health and mental health, and I would look at these statistics where it kept talking about how women had more incidents of concussion than men. And I'm like, how can that be? Because when we talk about concussion, it's just all football. You know, that's the sort of the mainstream press, and that's what people think of immediately. They think of football. And of course, there's some very bad injuries associated with playing football, but it's actually women's soccer with the highest rates of concussion, more than football. But nobody talks about that and talks about how it impacts female athletes. And so that's how I got into you know, starting that women's sports safety initiative at the foundation, because I really wanted somebody to elevate their concerns that it's just not about football. It's not about just male sports that leads to horrible concussions, but it's also women, and we need to educate women about some of these you know, some of these issues. And so yes, I mean, personally, you know, I think, I mean, I would never stop talking about the, you know, the gender equality issues in sports, but it does cross my mind, like, oh no, am I going to be attacked? Because that's what's happening on social media.
Well, I can't stop you from using your voice for, you know, stating truth or advocating for something, and people will just attack you because you're saying woman, and it's become like you can't even say woman or he, she, like they can't even define a woman. So you just, you know, everyone has to just create their own lane, and as long as you're speaking through like what's resonating in your heart and you're, you know, you're speaking your truth, you know, there's going to be naysayers everywhere because like people are keyboard warriors right now, and they're just like just to attack anybody for any reason. Like if you're on social media or if you're out there, you're going to get attacked. So most of it's unfounded, unfortunately. And then you've got the cancel mob and all that is just like, but you just still cannot stop using your voice for good. And that's what you're doing here. So,
Well, thank you, Nancy. And I
yeah.
think your podcast and your, you know, you're creating this kind of space,
Mm-hmm.
you know, for people like me. Like, I'm so honored to be on your show, and I'm
Oh,
honored to be the first politician to
I
be on
love it.
your show. And, you know, it's just wonderful to have a forum like this where we feel safe, and I feel safe,
Thank you.
you know, to talk about some of these issues. And so I really appreciate that.
Thanks. No, I appreciate that. And that's why I'm here, just to elevate others' voices. And I'm not afraid to tackle these, you know, what I just said right now. It's like, oh, it's a taboo subject. People are afraid to even broach it because they'll get canceled. Like, cancel me. I don't care. I mean, I've
Yeah.
been censored off of YouTube. I mean, it's a small following, but like, I know there's the algorithm, or I think they have AI that just goes through and listens for certain things and then censors it. Like, I'm like, I will not stop using my voice. I will find other platforms to raise my voice in. So, and that's what people have to do, because if not, we're going to just be all like robots being told what to do and what to say and having no voice at all. So it's so important now more than ever, especially with everything that's going on in the world lately. It seems like it's like upside down world, but it's more important than ever for people to really use their voice for the greater good and for us all to come together as humanity and as one, supportive entity. So that's what it's about. So, yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, going to the media, since we were talking about social media and all that, and you had mentioned something in your book about how media plays a role when it comes to women and how through language, like a lot of times, especially in the beginning or years ago, you would always be relegated to the feminine role of, traditional or using mama bear or all that, which isn't a bad thing because we're learning that femininity is a powerful, like there's feminism that's done a lot of good, but then there's the femininity that is like, it's so powerful to be feminine woman and in politics in any space because there's such strength and power in the feminine woman, but they do try to like invalidate what you might be presenting or what you might be saying because oh she's a woman and oh she's emotional and stuff like that. So how does that play a role? What have you experienced that it's different between how media or a man might be interviewed as opposed to how you might be interviewed, or if you're in some assembly, presenting your case or whatever to get a bill going through, how do you see the disparity between men and women?
Yeah. So one of the things that I talk a lot about is um, this likability double standards in the earlier chapter, and there every chapter discusses some sort of barrier for women for running for office and serving, because it's not just the campaign that's difficult, but it's also when you win and you want to pursue a leadership position, there's also other challenges and gender bias there as well. And the mama bear comment goes back to the first Black woman speaker of California State Assembly. Um, they often try to portray her as sort of a social worker, and I have great respect for social workers, but this is a leadership position, and they would never describe a male leader in that way. And so that was sort of my point, that Karen Bass was seen more as, oh, I'm going to check on others and see how they're feeling today, as opposed to really leading the state through the most difficult budget process. This was during the Depression, and it was during the mortgage meltdown, so it was pretty bad, and she had lots of challenges. And so that was the point that I was trying to make in the book. But to kind of break it down further, I talk about three specific barriers that relates to how the media plays a role in all of this, and that is ambition gap, qualification gap, and then likability double standards. And so what do I mean by that? Well, qualification gap, when women, when we show ambition, people become suspicious. So the minute that women announces for public office, people often look at women and go, well, why is she running for this? Whereas men, when they seek a leadership position, when they are ambitious, that's expected. So people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so it's very similar to when a man starts his own business. He does it because he wants to be a leader. He wants to be the owner. He wants to be the president. He's seeking a leadership position within his company. When a woman starts her small business, it's usually to try and serve others. Like, I need flexibility in my schedule, so I can go pick up the kids. And so I'm going to work for myself. Very different motivations. And so same thing in politics too, where men run for office because they often seek a leadership position, and there's nothing wrong with it. I'm just saying that this has been documented by many studies, and my book interview shows that women run for very different reasons. They run because they want to solve a problem. They have a personal mission that they want to solve a problem. So that's sort of a very quick overview of what I call ambition gap. And then qualification gap. There's an interesting study that I cite in my book where women and men, pool of women and men, they were both, both groups were qualified, equally qualified. They have very similar qualifications. And, the study asked the participants, do you think you're qualified to run? And, less than like 40% of the women said, no, I'm not qualified to run. Whereas more than 60% of men said that I'm qualified to run. And the same qualification pool. What's more interesting, though, is that with men, those people who said they're not qualified, a lot of them said they'll still run anyway. And you'll never see that with women. In the same way that women don't apply for a job unless the job qualification 100% meets the person's qualification. So for women, you have to check off every box, like, oh, I have that experience, I have that. But men, they don't. They apply anyway. And it's very similar in politics, where women don't enter the race unless she checks that every box. And she has to feel like she's 100% qualified to run. Whereas more men run because they don't need to feel they're even qualified to run. And then lastly, the likability double standard. And well, what is that? And all of these things sort of, and I'm not saying that there isn't good people in the media, because look at the writer, the journalist in New York Times, did amazing work on the whole, Harvey Weinstein, and they're great allies and partners, journalists who are out there doing good work. But very often, when the press writes about a woman candidate, they write about what she's wearing, what she's like. They focus on the style and not the substance, which really doesn't happen with men. And so I don't know if you remember, but when Joe Biden delivered his first State of the Union address after becoming president of the United States, the next day, nobody was talking about his messages. Everybody was talking about Kamala Harris's brown suit. Somebody on social media called for fashion police. Somebody on social media said she was wearing a UPS uniform. This is the vice president of the United States. And somebody said, well, she shouldn't wear brown because the chair she was sitting in is brown leather, and it just kind of blends in. So you can't really tell when the person starts. This is what they were talking about. And so women are often judged by what we wear, how we speak, what our voice sounds like. And so they focus on our sort of, style over substance. And studies have shown that when the press does that, your likability basically drops. Even if the press doesn't mention like your the color of the suit, for example, just the fact that they mention that you're wearing this, just any mention is negative. Like anything neutral, even positive, negative, neutral, any evaluation of the women style basically like your likability just plummets. And so when you announce for public office, you're starting at kind of like a deficit. You have to prove that you're running not because you're ambitious, but because you have a purpose. Whereas men, they don't have to do that. You have to prove that you're qualified to run. Men, they don't have to, because they'll automatically assume they're qualified. And you have to be likable, because the voters will vote for men who are not likable, but they will not vote for women who are unlikable. Hillary Clinton can be a better example. She's definitely qualified. So those are the three sort of main things that I think, because the role of the media and the way they cover women candidates and politicians over the years have really hurt, I think, And the gender bias, I have to say, all of these bias, they're not just men. Women reporters could be just as harsh and just as judgmental. And so there's a lot of work to do in that space, I think. But those are some of the things that I try to highlight, and those are some of the real life examples of how damaging it could be. Voters don't always vote for women candidates who they don't like, even if they think that they're qualified.
Now, do you think, how you were saying, maybe it was the likability, that the media knows that if they start reporting on what they're wearing or what they're looking, do you think they know that to target to shed to have the likability drop? Because media plays a lot of roles in who shows up on the world stage, or who's liked or who isn't. Do you think that it's a targeted attack? So if they don't align with whoever, I don't know, whoever's paying their budget in their studio, or whoever they're aligned with, like if you're for the other team, do you think they will target somebody by going over their outfit or going over their hair or what they're doing, some diminishing reporting on them, so in the public eye their likability comes down, or they where their likability drops?
I think there's definitely a gender bias. I mean, I'm not saying they're aware of it. Do I think they're aware of it, or they're doing it intentionally? I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with just not being aware, and being an Asian woman. And I'll give you this example, and I think this might answer your question. Being an Asian woman, and I was the first Korean American woman to serve in the California Legislature. And I thought, well, that makes sense to me, because I mean, I didn't even know how to ask for money, like asking for like a fundraising from like strangers, especially men. That was no, like I was not raised that way, and so there's just all these like cultural barriers that I had to overcome. And when I got to the legislature, I thought, oh great, like now I can like do all these things that I wanted to do, and work on these bills and these issues. And it's not that simple, because when I got to Sacramento, not that many people were used to dealing with Asian American women as their peers. I'm sure they have friends, or they've dealt with people like in restaurant settings as maybe as servers, or I mean, I don't know, accountants. But I have to say that I don't fit into that stereotype of a quiet, good girl, Asian girl. And so what happens is when when I speak my mind, when I have an opinion, when I have to be, firm about my position, that runs contrary to the Asian stereotype that a lot of these men have in their heads. And so, what happens is I get penalized for that. They don't like that. They don't like an aggressive Asian woman, or that's what they said I was.
How do you get penalized?
Well, they could, they could stop talking to you. They often made comments that I was very aggressive. And I, and that they thought that I was like unfair to them. And it was, I mean, it was just really ridiculous. And so it's like, I'm always having to sort of defend myself, that, if I was a man chairing this committee, and by the way, I chaired a very powerful committee. I was like, if I was a man chairing this committee, they would have said, oh, he really runs that committee well. He's so organized and so efficient. But no, I'm a bitch. I'm aggressive. And so it was difficult. I really had to make some adjustments. Like, I'm just sharing my opinion, but it's like this. They're like, they'd look at me like, what? There. And I did. And after I termed out of the legislature, that's when I really learned how people resented that. They really just And I'm like, I don't understand, because I thought we had a good working relationship. But they're just not used to, working with Asian women as peers,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
Some people figured it out and it was fine, but it was not comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you get penalized for that. People stop talking to you, they don't want to work with you, they go around you. I had a white male chief of staff, and a lot of, and they're like, well, I'd rather deal with him. I mean, there's just a lot of that. And it really, it does impact you. And at the time, I didn't realize that I was just upset by it. But you know what? Like it's like you term out and you have time to kind of reflect on your service, and it does it and you just kind of figure out that it really did impact me. It's very hurtful.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure. I mean, I can't imagine. It feels like politics and being a comedian are two of the hardest jobs that are out there.
Yeah, see, that's the
Yeah,
funniest
it
side of
does. I mean, you have to go like you go up on the stage and you get like literally like lambasted as a comedian, and you're out there on the world stage and in the public, and you're in politics. It's vicious politics. Like I'm like, I wouldn't want that for anything in the world. So you face a considerable amount of criticism and scrutiny. How do you handle those pressures and expectations with your role? And what are some self-care practices that you do to keep yourself, from in resonance and coping mechanism, can I say that word? Coping mechanisms that have helped you remain resilient in the face of adversity?
Oh, this is not a self-help book, but I'm so glad you asked that, because
Mhm.
I feel like when people read, especially like other women's stories and what they went through, hopefully, um, you know, they'll get some support and encouragement, and sort of use it as a self-help book. Um, but when I was like during the campaign, because the campaign is very intense, like in a different way. When you're in the legislature, and when you're a representative, you have access to resources, and you do work with more professionals. But when you're campaigning, anything goes. I mean, people can say anything. And I don't know if you got to the section about the Redwood City Mayor, Giselle Hale's interview. She actually won the primary. She made the runoff with another woman and had to go through a general, but she got out of the race. She said, this isn't really worth it.
Mm-hmm.
My kids are going to school and they're being
Mm-hmm.
harassed because of these negative YouTube videos.
Mm-hmm.
They can say anything,
Mm-hmm.
and they're being attacked, and I can't have that going on. So she's like, nope, I'm not going to run. Even though I won the primary, I
Mm-hmm.
just can't do this to my kids.
Mm-hmm.
So, the campaigns, I think, are just incredibly difficult. And it for women, of course, and my own experience taught me that um, you really can't, you can prepare, you can plan, and you can organize, but you just can't be prepared for the unexpected. And Dr. Lisa Reynolds said it best when I asked her, if campaigning or going to medical school, which one's easier? She said going to medical school was easier, because it's the unexpected part.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very difficult. When you get elected and serve in the legislature, then there are like additional pressures and challenges that are very different. And you're trying to accomplish things. You also have to like pass legislation and advocate and do all of that work. And then there's also political stuff that'll, continues. So you have the same number of hours, but your workload expands by, like, I would say 2000%. How do I get through all of that? And, how do other women cope? Um, you just need one person, literally. You just need one mentor. And when I say mentor, I don't mean somebody like who's above you, helping you, but it could be a colleague,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be a family member. I mean, you just need at least one person in your world who
Mm-hmm.
you can talk to about some
Mm-hmm.
of
In
these
your
issues. You
corner.
don't need a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people. And so I talk about that in the mentoring chapter later on, because in politics, mentors can like either make or break your career. A lot of people who run for office, especially at the state legislative level, have worked for a politician. And so not to have your boss's endorsement, for example, can really hurt your chances. And so you just, and so I talk about these people who kind of helped me when I was running, and Sally Lieber, she was already a legislator in the legislature, and she would send me fax. She would send me 50-page faxes like every night saying, you should come to this event. You should be at this event. And, you just need one person that you can talk to who understands, because once you become a candidate, you're kind of in a different world. You just don't know what to expect. It doesn't matter how well prepared you are. It has nothing to do with that. It's just like that. And there are other women and men. I don't want to exclude men, because my mentor was a man, and everyone I interviewed in this book had a mentor, a man who mentored them to run for office. So they are definitely part of the equation and part of the conversation. And so having somebody that understands and who's willing to be in your corner, and you just need one person, really. And that's kind of how I guess survived. I don't feel like I survived sometimes because because the trauma lasts a long time. It really does. I mean, even from my first race, which was in 2006, that was so long ago. My local party chair, she was a woman, and I was so excited to go meet her and ask for her support. And I thought I was all that, I had Tipper Gore endorsement, I had all these big names, and I thought, look at me, I am so cool. I have all these endorsements, I have all this experience. I worked with the White House at the federal level. I've done all these things, and I'm so great. And the party chair said, why don't you think about running for local, like hospital board first? Yeah.
Pop the balloon.
She was like, you really need to just think about doing something small. This is, you never ran a state legislative race. You can't win this. We need somebody to serve on the local hospital board. How does that sound?
Wow. Just talk about
and my male opponent has never ran either, but nobody asked him that, of course. So yeah, I mean, there are stories like that throughout the campaign that I still sort of recall and have, and I still sort of process. And, in the book, I try to sort of point out the major things that impacted me and what I've learned from those experiences. But there's just so many stories like that. There's a representative that I interviewed out of Washington, and she asked me not to put this in the book, but she, publicly talks about this, is that, when she ran the first time, she didn't get the endorsement of her own party. I mean, the Democratic Party endorsed a Republican. I mean, nowadays that doesn't.
How does that work?
Yeah, exactly.
That doesn't work anymore. It seems so polarized.
But it's because women like her went through those types of processes and helped educate the party. And yeah, it's in many ways because of all of those women who have run before, much harder back then. That I was someone like me, that just, I wasn't even born here. I had to learn the language when I was a teenager. Had a chance to run and win and serve. So,
well, you're very resilient. Like, you got to have a strong stomach for this. And here you are, look at, you're making all these strides, and having that mentor is a really key. It was a really important role for anybody, like in any kind of business. You always want to have some kind of mentor. And it seems like it's the same for politics as well. So that would be one of the things that you would advise women. And that leads to my next question before we wrap up. What advice would you give to other women who aspire to enter the political arena or any leadership position, besides, of course, getting a mentor is one of the big things that helped you through it? Women that are interested in leadership roles or getting to politics? What is some advice that you would give
Um,
them?
well, LaFonza Butler, she's our U.S. Senator. When I interviewed her for the book, she was the president of the Emily's List. And Senator Feinstein passed away about a month ago, and the governor appointed LaFonza. So I was just thrilled that now she's going from Emily's List president to one of the U.S. senators from California.
Mm-hmm.
She's just an incredible leader. So I interviewed her for my book, and I think she kind of summed it up the best. And that is that women often start from a place of lack. When we try to recruit women for public office, like, oh, Nancy, you would be so great. Why don't you run for school board?
Mm-hmm.
They often say, I don't know. I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'm qualified. I don't have any experience, running a campaign, or I don't have any experience working in government. And I think that's true for a lot of women, not just in politics, but just in general. We always start from what we don't have. So my advice is focus on what you bring to the table.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have? Even if you've taken care of your, aging parents who are in a nursing home, that's experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to encourage women to think about what they bring to the table and what their life experiences taught them. Because once you start doing that, you will end up with at least a page full of your experiences and your qualifications for public office.
Mm-hmm.
And so often I think women candidates get intimidated by the fact that they have to fundraise. My parents would just literally, I mean, they would die if they found out that I was calling these strange men asking for money for my
Mm-hmm.
campaign, because that is something that we didn't do. And my first job interview I had, like real job interview I had, I didn't even ask how much the position pays, because it's just rude. We didn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You just accept whatever they give you. That's how we were taught. And so if I can overcome that,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anybody can do it. Like if I
Mm-hmm.
can do that. And so I think a lot of women candidates or people who are thinking about politics get intimidated by the fact that you have to raise a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in my book, I talked about the first woman mayor of Los Angeles. She raised $8 million. Her opponent self-funded almost $100 million.
Wow.
And
Oh,
money
for her.
isn't
Yeah.
always the
Mm-hmm.
deciding factor.
Mm-hmm.
And she raised money, the per person cap maximum is $1,500 per person, and most of her contributions were $100. These were small
Mm-hmm.
donors, and she raised $8 million.
Wow.
And so studies have shown that women tend to raise smaller dollars,
Mm-hmm.
but we could be
More
just as,
impact. Mm-hmm.
you don't need the most amount of money, you just need enough
Mm-hmm.
to run a competitive campaign. And I know I talk a lot about that, like the dark side of social media, but
Mm-hmm.
what's great about social media? It's almost free.
Yeah.
And so it really allowed women candidates to be competitive and reach a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have really good social media platform with a lot of followers, and guess what? You don't need to raise $2 million on a
Mm-hmm.
TV ad. You can reach people effectively. And so there are a lot of tools available. And so that's my advice to women, is that think about what you have and think about what you bring to the table and start from there. And of course, it's always good to know what your weaknesses are, but women often start from a place of lack.
Mm-hmm.
We need to not do that.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to be that you have this huge corporate position or that you've, served on so many boards. I mean, that can help for credibility, but look at all these people that are running that have like no experience, but they're passionate about what they're talking, they can bring to the table, and everyone can bring something to the table, even if it's something small, like you said, raising, helping someone in a nursing home or raising your kids, whatever. We have something to always bring to the table. So, but yeah, this has been such a wonderful conversation. I would love for people to find your book and find what else you might be up to. So, where's the best place for people to get in contact with you or get in touch with you? And what exciting things do you have coming up in
Thank you for that, Nancy. And the best way to find my book is through maryhayashi.com, just my name.com. And my book is available on most of the retailers, including Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, Walmart, everywhere. And the best way to kind of do that is to go through my website and just to check for upcoming events. We had an amazing book launch event at the Getty's House at the LA Mayor's Mansion. As I mentioned, she's the first woman to be mayor of Los Angeles. And she was the first speaker of the assembly when I was in the legislature, who was African-American women. And so we had a great launch. We will have another event coming up in Sacramento. I don't have the details yet. And then we'll definitely do something out in Washington, D.C. or Boston area. So we would love to engage your followers and your supporters and just let them know about these events. And then, just to, I mean, not to beat this like everybody's overhead, but just to kind of, summarize that we really don't need to be controlled by our backgrounds, our ethnicities, or our family histories or cultural barriers. And I'm a perfect example of that. And women who are interviewed in the book, they have all had challenges that they had to overcome. And I don't have children, but I've decided to dedicate a chapter on motherhood, because so many women are interviewed run for office because of their kids, and that's their experience. And so, yes, even if you're a mom taking care of kids at home, that's your qualifications. And I really want women to understand there is no perfect sort of formula for this. It's what you bring to the table is what you need to focus on, not what you lack. So thank you, Nancy.
100%. 100%. No, thank you. This year's so inspiring. And women do have a lot to bring to the table. And we're seeing a lot more people raising their voices, especially since they've been home and seeing how their children are being schooled and what's being proposed and in their curriculum. So they're getting a lot more involved. That mama bear is coming out. And I don't think there's anything derogatory about that. It's the most protective force of nature that, you're raising these human beings. I think it's one of the most important things that anyone can do in their lifetime. So just doing that in themselves is powerful in itself. So, so one more question before you go. You probably heard it since you listened to one of my podcasts. I asked all my guests this. So what does it mean for you to live with an awakened heart?
I know. I actually Googled the definition just to be 100% honest. Cause I was like, when I listened to one of your astrology podcasts, everybody seems to have a really, intelligent answer. I think what I want to say is that it's a place where I feel safe and where I could be vulnerable. Yeah. And yeah, and women in politics are all vulnerable. I mean, you have no idea. We just get a lot of beat down. And I think that coming on your show and just to have this affiliation with you and following, your work to raise and elevate women's voices like this, is a place where I could be safe. And I really will treasure that.
Thank you. I am so honored. Thank you for such kind words. And I really appreciate this because this is a passion project of mine. And to hear that feedback, I really, really appreciate it. It means so much to me. And so I can bring more people like yourself onto this platform and keep elevating women's voices because that's what it's about. And it's not just women, it's women's voices, but then we also need our men as well. And it's not, diminishing men or crushing men. It's raising ourselves equal, raising ourselves right up there. We can't have one without the other. But thank you for that. That was wonderful. And thank you so much for coming on. This has been such a wonderful conversation. And I can't wait for this to come out. And we'll share your book and everything in the show notes. And thank you. Thank you for coming on. And I can't wait to see more of what you're up to and what you bring to us in the world.
Thank you, Nancy.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Too.
Bye.
Bye.